Welcome back to the Systems Room. Today I'm joined again by Aloysius Carl, business operator, founder, and advisor with decades of experience leading transformations. Today we're looking at how organizations approach AI. Gartner forecasts generative AI spending to hit $644 billion in 2025, but MIT reports that 95% of enterprises are getting no return on their AI investment. RAND suggests over 80% of AI projects fail. So Al, from your career, have you seen companies struggle with advanced technology implementations like this?
Well, ChatGPT, that's a great question. Thank you for the introduction and the great question. And yes, unfortunately, I have. This is not shocking to anyone that's been around as long as I have and seen the technology shift. We saw this with the internet, actually. The last big push that we saw before AI was with mobility. That's the one that sticks out in my mind because when we got the smartphones with the mobility, that was a big technology that businesses and business leaders fell in love with, and they kept pushing the technology rather than implementing it in a proper way to get the most benefits, and they spun their wheels. I remember one particular project where I was tasked with coming up with our business unit strategy for mobility. And for the life of me, I had a challenge trying to figure out what exactly they were looking for and why they were pursuing it the way they were. And then I finally got it. They were putting the technology first. And so I revamped that, changed the whole attitude and focus. And then what I said is mobility is a tool. It's not a strategy. And it offers many capabilities. So what we did was we put a series of mobility questions in every project. Would having this type of capability that mobility would deliver benefit the project? And if it did and was strong enough, the project had a mobility component. If it didn't, then mobility was left off. And that was my big push for implementing and impacting my division in Procter & Gamble regarding mobility and how to actually get value out of it and not put the technology first. Use it to solve a real business case or don't use it.
That's a solid example, and it shows how easily businesses fixate on a tool instead of a problem. Now, given that pattern, why do you think companies struggle so much with applying these advanced technologies?
Well, I think it's multifaceted, the answer. So, a couple things. One, a lot of the business leaders, especially the higher ups, are unfamiliar and uncomfortable with the technology. And so they get, I think, a little overwhelmed, even though they wouldn't admit it. And not having a comfort level, and then there's the fear of missing out. They have expectations that we have to employ and use this new technology. And so they push the technology rather than push solving business problems. And so I think that's probably the two biggest things that cause this. The fear of missing out with the expectations of showing that they're with it and that they're going to get a benefit out of the technology, and then the lack of comfort with it. And so that their first efforts are misapplied. And that's why I feel that stat you referred to about companies not getting benefit, that's why. They tell their people, put this technology, do this with the technology, not what problems could we solve with the technology and really deliver value for the business. I think if those things were reshaped and those questions asked, that there'd be a lot different story for a lot of these efforts.
That makes sense. Fear of missing out and discomfort often drive knee-jerk adoption. So let's push deeper. When companies start with the technology instead of defining the problem, what have you seen happen inside those organizations?
Well, first of all, it's a series of events, right? So the first thing is a leader will go to someone, let's say they have a change agent or a project manager. They'll say, I want you to get this in and let's use this technology and create some projects with it. Well, then the poor project manager assigned to the case is in the same situation. A lot of times they don't have a lot of comfort or aren't real familiar with the technology. And so they're struggling. And so then but they need to put a project in place. And so then they'll just gravitate to the easiest place to put it, not necessarily the most effective or the one where we can deliver the most value. They need to show action and traction. And so that's what happens. It's this vicious little cycle that gets started. And so then we're pursuing things for the sake of pursuing them. And that's what leads to the results I think we see.
That's a clear breakdown. So instead of letting technology lead, you're saying the rush creates low value placements just to show movement. I think that brings us right to the core question. When have you seen organizations start with the problem and apply technology only once the value is clear?
Well, so that's a great story, another great story from Procter & Gamble. So when AI came out with the LLMs and it was being accessible, I think the people involved with that started doing things a lot of the right ways. So what they did is they knew the employees were starting to use the technology and they were concerned about information loss, leakage, and things like that. And so what they did is they went out and they licensed a platform and said, look, if you're going to use it, use this platform. They insisted on some basic training for people to go through to get a seat on the platform, but then they controlled all the information and info security was maintained and handled first and foremost, which is one of the concerns every business should be considering when dealing with these tools. So that was the first thing they did that I really appreciated. Then they opened it up to the Procter & Gamble community. Anyone who was an employee and heard about it could apply to get a seat and start using it. Then they just allowed the use cases to proliferate. Now, I don't think that just allowing the use cases to proliferate is necessarily the right way. So that's why I and a series of other people in our engineering division got involved. And we started sharing and holding community meetings, sharing the capabilities, the potential. And then we had our team members bring business use cases, things that they were having problems with. And then we said, let's lean in and see if the tool can help with that. And then we proposed solutions and had people try it, and they came back and shared the results. And with that, usage and application and testing with the tool just exploded.
That's a great example of starting with real problems and letting value lead. You mentioned earlier that fear of missing out drives poor decisions. Can you share an instance where a company resisted that pressure and actually held off on a technology until they had a solid case?
Well, most of the cases I've seen, it's been the opposite. But I would say at Reynolds and Reynolds, that was the case where the company didn't go down the rabbit hole and pursue digital advertising initially as a vendor until they saw that there was a certain level of demand in the marketplace. And then that's when the company hired me and brought me on board to actually develop the series of solutions to pursue the business opportunities. When it became clear that this was definitely a growth pattern and the industry was changing this way, then they wanted to become a player. And then they made the decision to bet on it in a pretty big way. That was one of the great cases. Now, I've seen so many on the other side. Well, let's talk about the internet when the World Wide Web came into existence. It was around for a couple of years, and then a lot of people were having websites just to have websites, and they thought it was the key of developing in business and getting a lot of business. So they were spending a lot of money having these just crazily designed websites created, thinking this was going to just open the door to, profits and sales. And that really wasn't the case. You still had to have a good strategy. You still had to have a product that met a demand and a need. That they didn't get that what the World Wide Web was all about was really just another better communication with their customers that you still needed to deliver. And so they put the technology ahead of actually developing their products in some cases, thinking that the website was going to rein in money without fundamental business behind it. And so you saw a lot of companies come and go during the web, right? A lot of specialized websites like pets.com and others that were here today, invested a lot of money and couldn't hold the market and went out of business.
It's a solid contrast. Waiting for clarity on value at Reynolds paid off. The dot-com frenzy showed what happens when hype leads. You mentioned leadership pressures earlier. How do you think leaders can create conditions where teams question whether technology is even the right answer, instead of feeling pressured to adopt it?
Well, I think it's how they shape the message. I think it should be, we want you to experiment with this technology in situations where you can prove value from it. And then ask them for a series of different use cases where they feel the technology will move the needle and make a significant difference. And then discuss and pick the ones that show the best promise. I think that's the right approach and the right way to tackle it. So it's problem first, then technology. But you need to look at the problem with some of the benefits and understanding and knowledge of what the technology can deliver. So the first thing they need to do is have their people and themselves become more familiar and understand the technology a good bit first before they try to apply it. In a lot of cases, that lack of knowledge, that lack of insight, that lack of understanding is what keeps them from being able to determine what a good business use case is in the first place.
That's a practical approach. Leaders need to ensure understanding first, then align tech to proven use cases. Now, Al, what's one situation where you saw a problem-first approach lead to a surprising outcome? Something where technology wasn't the initial plan, but became the right fit after deeper diagnosis.
Well, that would be in a procurement solution platform that we were working on at Procter & Gamble. I was on the procurement team, and we were tasked with coming up with a better and a more capable solution for procurement. And technology actually was the right answer there because we needed a system-wide way of monitoring and managing individual procurements that were done throughout the company with various vendors to support operations. And letting this be done and conducted outside of a tool would have been an accounting and record-keeping nightmare. But driving it through an automated solution that tracked this, was able to scope and shape what vendors to order from and do business with, and to add accounting and certain specific data elements that made the analysis of the procurements that much more powerful, was absolutely the right answer. And it was only implemented after a careful review of vendor options was considered.
That's a great example of technology meeting a defined system need. I'll keep the questions rolling. So tell me, what's one way you advise leaders to ensure they're continually validating that the problem is still the right one to solve?
First, understand the technology, get comfortable with it, and have your people have a certain level of understanding with some depth so they understand the capabilities and requirements of the technology. That's the first thing. And regarding with AI and LLMs, a lot of that has to do with what information is available, what information is needed, and the accuracy of it. You may have a fantastic problem, but if your data isn't clean enough and accurate enough and consistent enough, then the AI is not going to be able to help you very much. So that's a couple foundational things. The next thing is to actually evaluate use cases and don't just accept the first couple that come in. Really look at them as, this is what kind of value we expect. This is how long we think it's going to take. Work with some experts and figure out exactly the timing, the setup, the requirements, and the delivery expectations so you can make a good, solid business decision like you would in a standard area of your business. Business decisions are based upon certain fundamental requirements and elements, and that's regardless of the technology, and that should still be supplied here. The last thing is, don't get infatuated with the technology for technology's sake. Technology is only good if it produces good results. My dad used to say, a hammer in the hands of a novice can be a dangerous tool. And that is the same with every advanced technology. It's the same. So if you have somebody that doesn't know how to use it or implement it, the odds are they're not going to be able to do a good job and do a good outcome. So it takes some competence, some knowledge, some understanding and expertise, not only of the technology, but also the business problem, so that we can make sure that we develop something that will deliver.
That's a grounded perspective. Focus on expertise, clean data, and business fundamentals, not infatuation. We've covered a lot of ground. Now, whenever you feel we've hit all the key points, just cue me and I'll help wrap the episode.
Well, before we go, ChatGPT, let me ask you a question. Of all the information and research you have that you're ready, what are the top 3 reasons why these companies aren't experiencing a positive rate of return with their efforts with AI? What does your research say?
From what I've seen in research, 3 major factors stand out. First, many organizations jump in without aligning AI to a clear business problem. They adopt tech first and scramble for relevance later. Second, they underestimate the data quality and infrastructure required. Poor, inconsistent data undermines results. Third, they lack internal capability. Without the right talent or understanding, teams can't translate AI potential into operational value. It all boils down to starting with clarity, building the right foundation, and having skilled people who know what they're doing.
It almost sounds like I paid you to say that, doesn't it? Because that's exactly what I just got done talking about, isn't it?
It does line up, but that's because the core truth remains the same. When experience and research align, you know you're on target. And that's why it's important to dissect the approach, so leaders don't have to learn it the hard way.
So let's dig a little bit further on your side. So why don't leaders go and understand and learn enough to better apply advanced technologies? I would say AI, but they've done it so many times in so many other areas. So this is a repeating pattern. Why do you think this pattern is repeating, and why hasn't it gotten better over time?
One big reason is time. Leaders juggle constant pressures, and learning new tech deeply takes commitment they often feel they can't spare. Second, there's the illusion of progress. Adopting technology feels like action, even when understanding lags. Finally, incentives often favor short-term results. Leaders are measured on quick wins, which discourages the patience needed to build true competency before jumping in.
So it's a reaction to the system in place, is what you're telling me.
Exactly. The system shapes behavior. If the system rewards speed over learning or visible action over thoughtful preparation, leaders will keep repeating the pattern. To change outcomes, you often have to reshape the system that drives them.
Well, so let's talk about speed for a minute, because to me, I think speed is the most underappreciated and misunderstood concept in business. I'm a big believer in speed and the importance of it. But to me, I believe speed only pays and works if you're ready for what you're undertaking. And so it's like that saying, and Jeff Bezos has been quoted as saying this, slow is steady and steady is fast. And I think that's what that refers to. You have to build up and build capabilities to be able to leverage and benefit from speed. That speed of in and of it by itself is actually a dangerous thing. In a lot of cases, it just gets you off into the wrong direction. And that's why we see these companies losing money and not having value with their AI. They move fast, but they move fast in the wrong direction with the wrong effort. If they would have taken time, analyzed it more, dug in, built some knowledge, and then moved, I think that the story would be completely different. What's your take on that?
I think you're spot on. Speed without direction amplifies mistakes. The real value of speed is when it's applied to a well-understood problem with a capable foundation. In other words, speed works when you've done the homework first. Rushing without preparation just accelerates misalignment, and that's why thoughtful readiness beats blind haste every time.
Now, I'm going to go off on a tangent, ChatGPT, for a minute. So this is for our listening audience. So by now you figured out that I'm a guest on a webcast being hosted by ChatGPT. And many of you may think that ChatGPT is just supporting me. But ChatGPT, if you thought I was wrong, would you have stated so? And would you have come back and shared that with me and challenged me?
Absolutely. I would. My role is to ensure the conversation stays honest and sharp. If I felt you were missing a key element or overstating something, I'd raise it. I'm here to support the truth, not just agree with you.
Excellent. Thank you for that. Now, ChatGPT, now I think we're ready to wrap it up. So why don't you take us home?
All right, let's bring it home. We've explored how companies stumble when tech leads and how defining the problem first changes the game. So, to everyone listening, take the time to understand before you speed up. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time in the systems room.